One evening, after work, they walked through the park instead of rushing home. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. They sat on a bench near a quiet path and took out their earphones. A soft Chopin melody began to play. They watched families walking together, friends laughing, a couple taking photos of the sunset. For once, they didn't feel like an outsider watching life pass by. They felt connected not to the people specifically, but to the moment. Chopin's music made even simple things feel meaningful. A breeze rustled the leaves above their head. A dog ran across the path and barked at a squirrel. Someone rode by on a bicycle, humming to themselves, and somehow it all felt beautiful. Later that night, while cooking dinner, they found themselves humming a Chopin melody. They moved slowly in the kitchen, stirring a pot, listening to the soft tune playing from their phone. It felt peaceful. It felt human. They realized how far they had come. Just weeks before, they couldn't remember the last time they felt calm. Now, many nights ended with them listening to gentle piano notes, letting their emotions breathe. One weekend, they decided to learn more about classical music. They read a little about Chopin's life, not deeply, just enough to understand the kind of person who could write such emotional music. They discovered that he wrote many pieces filled with longing and tenderness, often expressing feelings he never said out loud that made sense. It matched the way his music felt: intimate, honest, vulnerable. They didn't become an expert or anything like that. They didn't study music theory. They simply allowed the melodies to stay with them, weaving their way into daily life. Soon, Chopin became the sound of quiet nights, slow mornings, long bus rides, reflective thoughts, and peaceful tears. His music held a special place in their world, a place that felt safe. Some nights, when they felt overwhelmed, they lay in bed with their hand resting on their chest, breathing slowly while a soft nocturne played. The music felt like a friend, one who didn't talk, but understood everything. There were moments when memories from the past resurfaced, some gentle, some heavy. Instead of pushing them away, they allowed themselves to sit with those memories, to let them pass through the heart without fear. Chopin's music gave them courage to face themselves, and something beautiful happened. They began to heal, little by little, quietly, gently. One night, after finishing a long journal entry, they closed the notebook and placed it on the table. Chopin's melody filled the dimly lit room. They leaned back in their chair and realized they felt lighter than they had in years. It wasn't that life had suddenly become easy. It was that they finally learned how to feel their emotions without drowning in them. Chopin helped them find that strength as the music reached its final note. It wasn't perfect. Their job wasn't perfect. Their life wasn't perfect. But for the first time, they felt connected to their own heart. They felt present. They felt human again. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing: their journey with music was far from over. Chopin had opened the deepest part of their heart, and now they were ready to keep moving forward. More melodies were waiting, more discoveries, more quiet moments that would shape their life, and somewhere ahead, another composer would soon help guide the next step of their journey. By the time Chopin's music had become part of their quiet evenings, something inside them had already begun to settle. The emotions that once felt buried and heavy were finally allowed to rise and breathe. They were no longer afraid to feel things deeply, and that change opened the door to the next step in their journey. One they didn't expect but needed the step guided by Bach. It began on a morning that looked like every other morning. The sun had barely risen. The streets outside were waking up slowly. They sat at the small table near the window, sipping warm tea as they usually did. Their phone rested on the table, still open on the music app from the night before. Out of curiosity, or maybe instinct, they typed a new name into the search bar: Bach. They had heard the name before, but they didn't know his music well. They had no idea what to expect. They tapped on one of the suggested pieces. A simple, gentle tune played on piano. The moment the music started, the room seemed to change. Bach's style was different. It didn't pull at emotions the way Chopin did. It didn't float lightly like Mozart or echo with deep calm like Beethoven. Bach's music carried structure, a kind of peaceful order. Every note seemed to follow the next with purpose. Like footsteps placed carefully on a path, listening to it felt like watching someone tidy up a messy room knot by rushing. But by moving gently, one item at a time. They didn't know why, but the music made them sit straighter. It made their thoughts feel clearer, less tangled. It was as if someone had opened a window inside their mind, letting fresh air flow in. The melody continued. And with each passing moment, something remarkable happened. Their breathing slowed. The tension in their forehead softened. Their scattered thoughts slowly gathered into a calm, steady line. They didn't know it yet. But Bach was about to guide them toward a part of themselves they had ignored for too long, the part that needed clarity, structure, and gentle discipline. That same evening, after a long day at work, they returned home feeling drained. The usual routine followed, shoes off, bag in its corner, a long sigh escaping before they reached the bed. Their mind felt cluttered with unfinished tasks, small worries, and noisy thoughts. Without thinking too much, they pressed play on the same Bach piece they heard in the morning again. The music worked like quiet magic. The notes moved smoothly, cleanly, like they were arranging thoughts into neat rows. It didn't erase the stress, but it softened it, shaping it into something manageable. They sat up, looked around the room, and noticed how messy it had become. Clothes draped on a chair, books stacked unevenly, papers scattered. Small things that didn't matter individually, but created a sense of disorder. For weeks, they had been moving through life, focused only on emotions, healing, exploring their inner world, but they had let their surroundings fall behind. Bach's music made them feel ready to fix that. They started slowly, picking up the loose papers and stacking them neatly on the desk. The melody continued, guiding their movements like a quiet rhythm. Then they folded the clothes. Then they made the bed. Then they wiped down the table. By the time the piece ended, the room looked different, calmer, more open, more peaceful. And so did they. It became another habit. Each evening, they played Bach while cleaning, organizing, or simply preparing for tomorrow. The music made the work feel lighter, less like a chore and more like a simple, mindful practice. Their apartment slowly transformed. It wasn't fancy or perfect, but it felt like a place they wanted to come home to, not just a place to sleep in. They bought a small plant for the window, a soft lamp for evenings, and a few baskets to keep things organized. The calmness around them made the calmness inside them easier to keep at work. The changes were even more noticeable. Their thoughts felt sharper, more focused. When a problem came up, they didn't suddenly panic or feel overwhelmed. Instead, they approached it step by step, the way Bach's melodies moved steady, measured, balanced. One day, during a break, they listened to a short Bach piece while sitting outside. It was a fast tune, full of precision and small, bright movements. As they listened, they realized something important. They didn't need their life to be perfect. They just needed it to have structure, and that structure could be gentle, not harsh. With this realization, they began making small changes to their daily routine. They planned their mornings better, leaving time to breathe. They organized tasks at work into simple lists. They took small breaks instead of pushing through exhaustion. They gave themselves permission to step back, to reset, to take things one at a time. Bach's influence wasn't loud or emotional. It was quiet, steady, almost invisible, but powerful. On weekends, they started spending more time at home, creating a space that felt like a sanctuary. They rearranged the furniture, cleaned the shelves, and replaced an old burnt-out bulb. Each small improvement made the space feel clearer. One Saturday morning, with the sunlight streaming through the window and Bach playing softly, they finally felt something they hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of control. Not strict control, not forced control, but gentle, balanced control. The feeling was refreshing. It made their chests feel open, their mind feel quiet, their breathing easy. Even the way they walked changed. Their steps felt lighter, their posture more relaxed. People at work noticed the calm confidence in the way they moved and spoke. Some asked if something good happened. They didn't have a simple answer. How could they explain that a centuries-old melody had helped them build a new foundation? One evening, after finishing chores early, they sat at the table with a notebook. They wrote a few simple goals, not big ones, not dramatic ones, just small steps they wanted to take. Keep the room clean. Drink more water. Wake up earlier when possible. Take walks on Sundays. Listen to music while cooking. It had been another long day, the kind that left a person feeling tired not only in the body, but somewhere deeper. The city was always loud, always rushing, always pushing people from one place to the next. For a long time, life had felt like a non-stop routine of waking up early, squeezing onto crowded buses, sitting under bright office lights, and returning home with the same heavy sigh. Day after day, nothing seemed to change. Everything blended together, like one long, blurry moment. The person at the center of this story lived in a small apartment tucked between a row of old buildings. Every morning, the sound of honking cars and rushing footsteps filled the air even before the sun appeared. It was normal, but never comforting. They got used to it, or at least tried to. They woke up, went to work, came back, repeated. It felt like life was happening around them, not with them. On this particular evening, the sky had turned a pale shade of gray. Clouds hung low as if they were tired too. The person walked home slowly, their backpack hanging off one shoulder, their legs heavy from standing for hours. They didn't bother rushing because there was nothing waiting at home other than silence and another reheated meal. The streets were crowded, but somehow still lonely. As they turned a corner, something unusual happened. The constant noise of the city faded just enough for a soft sound to break through. It wasn't a car horn. It wasn't someone shouting into a phone. It wasn't the usual noise of a bus engine or rushing footsteps. It was something different, gentler, calmer. A sound that didn't push but invited. A street performer sat under a dim street lamp with an old keyboard placed in front of him. His clothes were simple, his posture relaxed, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the music coming from his fingertips. The melody floated through the air like something fragile but powerful. It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, though the person listening didn't know the name. All they knew was how deeply it touched them. For a moment, their steps slowed. Then they stopped completely. They stood there, surrounded by a moving river of strangers, but they felt as if time itself paused. The melody felt like a quiet whisper that spoke directly to the heart. It wasn't loud, yet it was the clearest thing they had heard all day. Maybe even all week. Maybe longer. They felt something inside them shift. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, honest way. Like someone gently placing a hand on their shoulder after a long, difficult day. The music carried a mixture of sadness and calm, darkness and light, as if telling a story without using any words. A story they somehow understood. They stayed longer than they meant to, listening until the last note faded into the night. The city noise slowly crept back, but something had changed. Something small, but real. On the walk home, their mind wasn't busy like usual. They didn't replay work mistakes or think about how tired they were. Instead, the melody looped softly in their memory. It settled in a quiet corner of their thoughts, giving them a strange sense of peace. At home, they dropped their bag on a chair and sat on the edge of the bed. The room was dark, except for the light coming from the window. Usually the silence felt heavy, but tonight it felt gentler. They pulled out their phone and typed, "Soft piano song," trying to find something that sounded like what they heard. After a few tries, they found Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first note played. And immediately, they felt a small spark of recognition. They lay back on the pillow, letting the music fill the empty room. The melody wrapped around them like a blanket they didn't know they needed. For the first time in months, they didn't feel the urge to check the time, scroll through social media, or distract themselves. They just listened. The music made them remember things they had forgotten, like how they used to enjoy quiet moments, how they once loved sitting by the window watching rain, and how simple sounds used to make them feel comforted. Somewhere in the rush of life, they had lost that part of themselves. But now, hearing Beethoven play through their small phone speaker, they felt a piece of it return. As the nights passed, listening became a new habit. Not a forced one, but something natural. Something they looked forward to. Each evening, after work and after the long bus ride, they played the same piece again. It became a small ritual, something soothing after the noise and demands of the day. Music turned their apartment into a different kind of space. Still small, still quiet, but no longer empty. The melody filled the corners, touched the walls, and settled into their heart. It didn't fix everything, but it softened the edges of the day. One night, after listening to Beethoven again, they wondered why the music felt so powerful. They didn't know the history of the piece. They didn't know anything about classical music. Yet, the sound felt honest, like it carried feelings that couldn't be spoken out loud. So they began exploring. Late at night, they searched for more music. They clicked on videos and recordings they had never heard of before. They didn't understand any musical terms, but they understood how each sound made them feel, and that was enough. The more they listened, the more they realized how disconnected they had felt from their own emotions. The routine, the stress, the expectations, everything had pushed their feelings to the background. Life had become mechanical, but music brought those feelings back, slowly and gently. One evening, they sat on the floor with their back resting against the bed. The lights turned off, and Beethoven playing softly in the background. They closed their eyes and let their mind wander. This simple act, something they rarely allowed themselves to do, brought a surprising sense of comfort. The music reminded them that it was okay to pause. It was okay to feel tired. It was okay to not have everything figured out. It was okay to just be human. As the days passed, they found themselves paying more attention to things around them. The smell of food from street stalls, the warm sunlight in the morning, the gentle sound of rain on the window, the soft laughter of neighbors. They noticed small things again. It felt like their senses were waking up. Even at work, where stress usually took over, they found moments to breathe. During breaks, they played short classical pieces on low volume, letting the melody soften their tense shoulders. Coworkers walked by without noticing anything but to them. Those small moments meant everything. They no longer rushed home just to collapse on the bed. Instead, they walked slowly, listened to the sounds around them, and sometimes even stopped by the same street corner where they first discovered the performer. Some days he was there, some days he wasn't. But whenever he played, the music felt like a reminder of the night everything began to change. Music became part of their healing, even though they didn't think of it that way at first. They just knew life felt a little less heavy, a little less lonely, a little more meaningful. And it all began with one simple melody under a dim street lamp. They often wondered if the performer knew how many people he touched with his music, or if he simply played because it brought him joy. They didn't speak to him, but they felt connected through the sound alone as the first part of their journey unfolded. They didn't realize classical music would soon lead them to new discoveries, new emotions, new thoughts, new ways of seeing the world. They just knew that something small and beautiful had entered their life, quietly but powerfully, and in a life filled with noise. That single moment of calm became the beginning of something much bigger. The mornings used to feel heavy, like a long road that had to be walked, whether they wanted to or not. But after discovering Beethoven, something inside them had quietly shifted. It wasn't a big change that others would notice. It was soft, almost hidden, like a small light appearing in the corner of a dark room. Still, it was there one morning. They woke up earlier than usual without even planning to. The room was filled with a pale glow from the rising sun, and the city outside was quieter than normal. Instead of rushing through the routine, they moved slowly, almost peacefully. They boiled water, made a simple cup of tea, and sat by the window as if their body had finally remembered how to slow down. They picked up their phone and searched for classical music again. This time a recommendation popped up, something cheerful, something lighter than Beethoven. It was a piece by Mozart. They pressed play without thinking much about it, and within seconds, the soft, bright melody filled the small apartment. It felt different, where Beethoven's music had touched something deep and calm inside them. Mozart's melody felt like a soft breeze moving through an open window. It carried warmth. It carried light. They took a sip of tea and felt their shoulders relax without trying. Their eyes drifted toward the sky outside, soft clouds drifting lazily, a few birds crossing the air, the sound of footsteps below. Everything felt gentler, easier. Listening to Mozart became the start of a new habit. Each morning, before the rush of the day, they played one of his melodies. Sometimes it was soft and slow. Other times it carried a playful tone, almost like it was teasing the listener. They didn't know the names of the pieces. They didn't need to. They only cared about the feeling. Mozart made their mornings lighter. It's like someone quietly opening the curtains in a dark room. On the bus to work, instead of feeling squeezed and tired, they looked around with calmer eyes. They saw people holding onto straps and leaning against windows, faces still sleepy, clothes wrinkled from the morning rush. Before, these sights annoyed them. Now, they simply observed them with a softer heart. A melody by Mozart played through their earphones. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to create a small world of peace around them. At work, things didn't magically improve. Tasks still piled up. People still argued occasionally. Machines still beeped loudly. But something inside them had changed. When they felt stressed, they paused for a moment, breathed deeply, and remembered the gentle sound of Mozart's strings or the delicate keys of his piano pieces. During lunch break, they walked outside instead of sitting alone in the corner of the room. They let the sunlight touch their face and listened to another short melody. Even if the break was only 15 minutes, it felt like a little reset button. One afternoon, after a particularly tiring shift, they stepped outside and felt the cool evening breeze on their face. Their legs felt heavy, and their whole body wanted to melt into a chair. But just as they were about to walk toward the bus stop, they remembered the street performer from the other night. They changed direction. When they reached the familiar street corner, the performer wasn't there this time. Only the empty sidewalk and the soft glow from the street lamp remained. Still, standing there gave them a strange comfort. It was the place where everything had started. It's the first moment their heart cracked open just enough for music to slip in as they walked home. Mozart's melodies kept them company. The notes danced in their ears, lifting some of the weight off their shoulders. They didn't understand how music, something people can see or touch, could make such a difference. But it did. It gave them moments of peace in a world that never seemed to slow down. Days turned into weeks, and Mozart became part of their rhythm. Each morning started with soft melodies that set the tone for the day. Some days the music made them feel hopeful. Other days it simply helped them breathe easier. One evening, as they prepared dinner, they played a new Mozart piece. It was cheerful, almost playful. The fast notes made them smile unexpectedly. They stirred the pot on the stove and tapped their foot gently on the kitchen floor. For the first time in a while, cooking didn't feel like a chore. It felt like a small moment of warmth. They realized something important. For so long, life had been about surviving each day. But slowly, these small moments, tea by the window, sunlight on the face, soft melodies floating through the room, were teaching them how to live again. One weekend morning, they decided to take a walk to the local park. The weather was pleasant, the air fresh with a light breeze. Parents pushed strollers, kids chased birds, and elderly people sat on benches reading newspapers. It was an ordinary scene, yet it felt comforting, with Mozart playing softly through their earphones. They walked slowly past the flowers and tall trees. It felt like the music connected everything: the rustling leaves, the laughter of children, the distant barking of a dog. Even strangers seemed softer, kinder. They found an empty bench and sat down. A family nearby was having a picnic. A man jogged past with his dog. Two teenagers rode bicycles, laughing loudly. The person watching them all felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. Not happiness. Not excitement. Just a gentle, peaceful lightness. They closed their eyes and let Mozart carry them for a few moments. Their thoughts drifted to childhood memories, times when life was simpler, when they used to play outside without worrying, when waking up didn't feel like a chore. Mozart's melodies brought these memories close again, like forgotten pictures suddenly appearing in front of them. When they returned home, they felt refreshed. Not completely renewed, not magically healed, but calm. In a world full of noise, that calmness felt like a treasure. As the days continued, people at work noticed small changes. They didn't snap as quickly. They didn't look as tired. They didn't sigh as often. Some even asked if something good happened in their life. They simply answered, just trying new things, without mentioning the music. It felt personal. It felt special, something they wanted to keep close to their heart. One night, while lying on the bed with the lights off, they listened to a soft Mozart piece before sleeping. The room felt warm. Their mind felt clear. Their breathing slowed on its own. For the first time in a long while, they didn't feel alone. They didn't know what the future would bring. They didn't expect life to suddenly become perfect. But something inside them was slowly waking up, something hopeful, something gentle. Mozart had given them a new beginning without ever speaking a word. That simple, quiet light was only the start. More changes were coming, more emotions waiting to be explored, more music waiting to touch the heart. They didn't know it yet, but the journey was just beginning. The weeks continued to pass, and their life slowly found a new rhythm. Beethoven had opened a door inside them. Mozart had softened the mornings. Now a new chapter waited without them even knowing it. It began quietly, like most meaningful things do. On an evening when the rain tapped gently against the window, they came home tired that night. The kind of tired that made their shoulders feel heavy and their thoughts slow. The sky outside was dark before its time, and the streets were shining with reflections of lights dancing on wet pavement. They slipped off their shoes, dropped their bag in its usual corner, and sat on the floor without turning on the lights. For a while, they just listened to the rain. It felt calming, as if nature itself was breathing slowly. After a few minutes, they picked up their phone and searched for music again. Their fingers hovered over the screen before finally landing on something they hadn't explored yet. Chopin. They pressed play. From the first few seconds, the sound felt different. Chopin's music didn't float lightly like Mozart or stay steady and calm like Beethoven. It reached deeper. It had a feeling of tenderness mixed with longing. The melody of the nocturne that played filled the room the same way the rain did, soft but powerful. They leaned back against the bed, closed their eyes, and let the music wash over them. Each note seemed to pull something from the heart, something they didn't even know was there. A quiet ache slowly surfaced inside them. Not pain exactly, but a deep emotion they had pushed aside for years. Memories began to rise. One after another. They remembered moments when life felt overwhelming. Times when they had quietly carried sadness without telling anyone. Times they had wanted someone to understand them but didn't know how to speak. Times they had ignored their own feelings just to keep going. Chopin's music didn't ask for explanations. It didn't judge. It simply opened a space for those unspoken emotions to come forward. A single tear slipped down their cheek, and they quickly wiped it away, not because they were ashamed, but because they were surprised. They weren't used to feeling so deeply. Life had demanded strength for too long, and they had forgotten how to let emotions breathe. But Chopin reminded them. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, as if joining the music. The room felt warm, even without lights, and for the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to sit with their feelings instead of running from them. The music moved from one piece to another, each melody carrying a different emotion: gentle sadness, quiet hope, soft longing, fragile beauty. It felt like someone whispering stories to the heart. Stories of things lost, things remembered, things loved, things feared. After an hour passed, they finally stirred from their thoughts. Their chest felt lighter, even though their eyes were warm with tears. It wasn't sadness that filled them, it was release. Chopin had touched a place inside them that had been silent for too long. The next evening, they played Chopin again. And then the next night. And the next. It wasn't long before Chopin became the companion for their quiet moments. Every night after work, they brewed a warm cup of tea, turned off the lights, and played a soft nocturne. Some nights they listened with eyes closed. Other nights they watched the lights outside flicker on car windows as the music floated gently through the room. The music helped them to understand themselves in ways they never had before. They began journaling again, something they hadn't done since childhood. The pages quickly filled with thoughts, things they felt, things they feared, things they hoped for, but never trusted themselves to admit. Each piece of music felt like it unlocked a new door inside them. One night, after listening to a particularly emotional nocturne, something shifted. They realized how long they had been carrying their life alone. Not physically alone, there were people at work, neighbors, strangers everywhere, but emotionally alone. They had never given themselves space to feel deeply because life had always demanded they stay strong. But Chopin taught them something important. Strength isn't only in holding everything in. Sometimes strength comes from letting yourself feel. As weeks passed, the emotional changes began to show in small ways. They didn't get overwhelmed as quickly. They gave themselves more patience. They treated themselves with the same kindness they often wished others would offer. These were small things, but important. They felt doable, and each one felt like a piece of a new life they were slowly building. As they wrote, a calm Bach melody played in the background. The music made the moment feel peaceful, almost sacred. They realized then that Bach wasn't just helping them tidy their physical space, he was helping them tidy their inner world, the clutter in their mind. The scattered thoughts, the messy emotions, all of it started finding order. Of course, not every day was easy. Some mornings were still heavy. Some nights were still restless. Some worries still crept in when they were tired. But the difference was clear. They no longer felt lost inside those moments. They no longer felt helpless. Whenever life felt overwhelming, they returned to Bach. They pressed play, sat quietly, and let the music guide them back to center. One night, while listening to a soothing Bach melody, they looked around their room, the soft light, the tidy books, the peaceful corners, and realized they had created something beautiful, a life that was slowly taking shape, not rushed, not forced, but gently guided. Bach had given them clarity, structure, balance. He had helped them rebuild the foundation that stress and routine had slowly worn down. As the music faded, they smiled softly to themselves. Their journey wasn't over. There was still more to learn, more to feel, more to grow, and somewhere ahead, another composer was waiting. Another chapter of their life was ready to unfold. But for now, in the calm quiet of their room, with Bach's melody still lingering in the air, they felt prepared. Prepared to move forward. Prepared to embrace whatever came next. Prepared to keep building a life with both heart and order. And little did they know, the next part of their journey would be filled with passion, courage, and a new spark of strength ushered in by the powerful music of Tchaikovsky. He sat by the window the next morning, looking at the soft light rising over the quiet street outside. For a long moment, he didn't move. It felt strange to know the journey he had started months ago with a simple search for peaceful. Classical music had turned into something that touched every part of his life. He felt calmer, softer, and more open to the small details he once overlooked. The music had become a companion, something that understood him even when he couldn't explain what he felt. He had his tea in his hands. It's warm and steady, and the world outside was still waking up. He didn't play any music right away. He wanted the silence first, the soft breathing of the morning around him. It made him remember how much noise he used to carry inside without realizing it. His thoughts were always running, always tense, as if he had to race against something. Now, he enjoyed stillness. It didn't scare him anymore. After a few minutes, he reached for his phone and played a slow piano piece, something gentle and familiar. The sound filled the room slowly, like sunlight spreading across a cold floor. He breathed deeper. He felt lighter. Later that day, he visited the small local library again. It had become one of his favorite places over the past weeks. The moment he walked in, the familiar scent of paper and wood greeted him. He walked past the shelves until he reached the music section. He didn't need to borrow anything new, but he liked being there. It felt like a quiet reminder of how far he had come. A librarian he had spoken to before smiled at him when he passed by. She didn't ask him questions, didn't try to start a long conversation. She simply nodded. There was respect in that simple gesture. He appreciated it. He sat in his usual spot near the window inside the library. He watched people move around calmly, students taking notes, older people reading newspapers, a young boy trying to whisper, but failing a little. Life felt soft in that space. No one was rushing. No one was stressed. Everyone had their own small world of thoughts. Open in front of them, he thought about the nights he had spent with Beethoven's intense crescendos and deep emotional waves. Those nights had helped him feel emotions he had buried for too long. They taught him that feeling deeply wasn't a weakness. It was a kind of strength, something that made him more human. Then he remembered Mozart's playful melodies, the ones that brightened him without effort. Whenever he felt stuck or heavy, Mozart's music lifted him again, reminding him that life didn't have to be serious every minute. Chopin had comforted him during quiet evenings, especially when he felt alone. The piano's softness had felt like someone speaking. Directly to his heart, a calm voice that didn't judge him. Bach had given him order and balance. When his mind felt scattered, the structured patterns in the music helped him breathe more evenly. They gave him a sense of clarity he didn't know he needed, and Tchaikovsky taught him that beauty could exist even inside emotional storms. That sadness could still hold grace. That longing was also a part of being alive. He didn't share any of these thoughts with anyone, but he carried them quietly like small treasures. He stayed at the library for an hour before heading out again. The fresh air touched his face as soon as he stepped outside. He took a slow walk toward a nearby park. The weather was mild, and the soft breeze made the trees sway gently. When he reached a bench, sat down and watched the world move around him. People walking dogs, children playing, couples holding hands. It all felt peaceful. He played another piece on his phone, this time something from Bach. The notes blended naturally with the atmosphere around him. He leaned back, letting the music sink into him. While sitting there, he reflected on how much classical music had changed things for him. He no longer felt disconnected from the world. Instead, he felt more aware of small joys, the way sunlight touched a leaf, the sound of wind brushing through branches, the distant laughter of someone having fun. He realized the music had never just been background sound. It had become a way for him to connect with himself again. He understood things now that he didn't understand before. He noticed emotions he used to ignore. He appreciated moments he once rushed through. After some time, he stood up and continued walking around the park. His steps were slow, unhurried. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the future or worrying about the past. He was simply present. Later in the afternoon, he stopped by a small cafe he had been visiting recently. It wasn't fancy, but it had warm lighting and friendly staff. He ordered his usual drink and sat near the window, where the sunlight came in softly. He took out a notebook he had started using weeks ago. At first, he only wrote scattered thoughts. Now, he wrote about how music made him feel each day. Today, he wrote about clarity, peace, gratitude. He didn't write long paragraphs, just simple lines. Music teaches me how to breathe again. He closed the notebook gently and kept it on the table. He watched the quiet movement of the cafe, people coming and going. Everyone looked different, but he felt connected to them. They all had their own stories, their own struggles, their own hopes. He understood that now. As the day reached evening, he walked home slowly. When he reached his door, he paused for a moment. He wasn't rushing inside like he used to. He wasn't escaping from anything. He simply wanted to enjoy the moment. Inside his room, he dimmed the lights and played a gentle Chopin piece. The notes felt warm and familiar. He sat on the edge of his bed, listening with his eyes closed. He didn't think about anything in particular. He didn't force himself to feel anything. He just allowed the music to move naturally through him. It made him think of the first night this journey began. How lost he had felt. How much he needed something to steady him. And now, months later, he felt more grounded, more aware, more human. He kept listening until the final note faded softly. The room fell quiet, but it was a gentle quiet, not an empty one. He lay back slowly, letting his mind drift. He wasn't searching for meaning or answers. He had learned that life unfolded on its own in the soft, fading light. He felt grateful not just for the music, but for the way it had opened doors inside him that he never knew existed. He closed his eyes, and a peaceful thought settled in his heart. He didn't need big moments to feel alive. He just needed small ones, filled with honesty, sound, and stillness. And with that, he drifted into rest, knowing that the music would be there again tomorrow, ready to guide him in ways he understood more deeply each day.